I was talking to a guy who served in Iraq as a guard in the palace of the fallen regime, overthrown by the American military. While his colleagues searched the countryside for phantom weapons of mass destruction, he played chess with someone we called a terrorist. Not so much an enemy now as just a routine captive, a prisoner bored inside walls he himself once oversaw as a figure of great power and wealth, like a knight. Barriers of culture tamed by this ancient game, they move their pieces, reading each other's faces and whatever other clues their gestures might betray. This high-value detainee always won, he said. No one ever beat him, even though, to his captor's surprise, he always seemed to play by the age-old rules. That man is dead, of course, and that place, checked in blood, is like a scattered board today, rampant without kings, all stray bishops, rooks, and pawns chasing something to win. When the crackpots talk about leadership, what they mean is a call to war, first thing, no other issues to explore. Sure, there are times in life you'll be forced to do things you hate to have to do, one of which, of course, is to participate in killing, which really should be the last resort. But when an occasion arises, an incident or instance for the bullhorns to fire up and the steel wheels of expensive machines which do not like to idle start grinding into action, these people will find the right slogans to manufacture and sing like varsity fight songs at a game. Only after their own sons and daughters are safely sequestered away from any threats and the actual business of bullets and bayonets is left to someone else, whom they will then disingenuously refer to as heroes. Well, the sad truth of it is that only the death of everyone else could ever make the singular world safe for freedom and democracy and the free trade they proclaim to generate directly from heaven. But all the sides have their gods, and the odds are they will never get along with their different accents and scripts read aloud, never tenuously from various pulpits and soapboxes, with their words being shouted through similar bullhorns, probably all made by the same company. Consider Adam and Eve, chased through Eden in those fundamentalist renditions where it all started at once, 6,000 years ago. Escaping Tyrannosaurus Rex only to be tricked into ruin by a single snake with a great pitch and a simple treat. And even God, who supposedly knew everything, had to ask, "Why aren't you running around naked like I planned?" The husband was ashamed to admit his weakness, blaming that inadvertent wife of his, that with her persuasive wiles, obviously unsatisfied with his gift of ribs, who fell for the glib serpent's shtick, and the history of scapegoats began. And man, though clothed in knowledge now, still stands stupefied at random apple pulpit huckster carts to deny things we learned the hard way about dinosaurs and talking snakes and paradise. The metaphor by the clever author of Genesis, lost in the vaporized garden, long since synthesized into a giant corporate orchard of forbidden trees, deep under the soil of whose roots the bones of paradoxes still fertilize the savory fruits of our favorite myths. An empty shelf is a curiosity, particularly when dust is left there to outline the space where something once was. Picture frames, perhaps, and books or mementos from trips, awards of some past glory. It's especially odd in your own house rather than a stranger's. That story is even better. Wiped clean, it loses its magic, removing the residue for imagination to fill in the blanks that might as well have been true. You can probe its meaning repeatedly, using your whole history like a tongue seeking a missing tooth. If anyone ever asks, Don't be too quick to explain. What business is it of theirs anyway? Unable, for whatever reason, to ever put anything else on it, just leave it alone to inertly define all the vital things you might have done. My G.I. Joes would kick in the door of my sister's Barbie house when it was least expected in a stunning blitzkrieg raid. Ken, weak and inept, was slain instantly where he sat watching the little plastic TV. Naturally, Barbie was taken away for the men's pleasure later, after they looted her tiara and stole her rubber car. They'd tear around the playroom floor, between the train set and the easy bake oven, running over any other toys that got in the way, until Donna burst in screaming at me, squealing how I was just the worst and about all the bad I always did. Then, of course, our parents would come in with stern looks and scolding words to break it up, mostly because they didn't like the noise. I'd just innocently shrug, pointing to those guilty soldiers who seemed to have a cold will of their own. And I could honestly say it wasn't me, knowing they'd believe it, because after all, boys will be boys. Beneath a tree in the park on a Sunday afternoon, under a sky blue in ways few of us understand, the trail of summer foreboding what doesn't belong, he etched his own name with a shotgun barrel in the pantheon of grief. Last time I saw him, he was still laughing at my disbelief in the ghosts who lived with him in his home. The quartz in the stone it was built with wouldn't let them out, he explained, fearless in ways few of us are. I wish he would have called. We could have smoked cigars together and once again solved nothing the same way we always used to. So I drove past his old house just a little while ago and, of course, saw no ghosts. But I noticed one thing odd in the middle of the afternoon on the first day he wouldn't return. Everything seemed quiet, and the porch light was on. I could write enough to fill a hefty volume for sure, even without excessive adjectives running on like those adolescent essays do tomorrow. But truly, a lot of the action would be slow. Nevertheless, it'd be an interesting tale at least, even omitting most of the flattering revisions and many of the more embarrassing positions. Every guy loves to tell the story of himself. Yes, the dirty details would be thrilling to some, maybe even make it sell, perhaps as a screenplay for one of those based on true events movies. But I'd rather not go into them. It's my autobiography, after all, and I'll say what I want. I suppose I could call it historical fiction, but then I'd have to change the names or else worry about lawsuits and other recriminations. It wouldn't make any money anyway. It wouldn't be one of those blockbusters or bestsellers, so why bother? That always seemed to be the point to everything for almost everyone I ever talked to along the way, although it never was for me. The kinds of things I like to do don't really pay. And with that being the case, the plot would contain dull references to drowning in debt, being profligate, the pyrrhic ways of a ne'er-do-well who believed a pile of pages stacked high enough might reach his sorry ass to heaven. And that's the main part I'm still uncertain about, the heaven element. I haven't yet come to terms with those sorts of notions, you know, the next place and all that, the spiritualism. And therein hides the theme and the redundancy of the actionless scenes. The bland saga of a guy from Scranton looking for meaning in the streets and alleys of a place filled with religion. His madcap adventures and mischievous encounters as he aged beyond anyone's expectations. In the melancholy end, though, he fails in his unnamed quest. And the heroic portrayal of an incorrigible brat just fades out. Everyone is let down again, sensing there is no redemption. Too many questions would linger, the sort with no answers. Even if I decided to fill in the gaping blanks with prurient truths, we all know there's a very limited audience for epics like that. If there is some veiled answer, it may as well be in Scranton. Not so glamorous, but neither was the Grail. A list of preferable cities would likely be quite long to most people. They'd be cleaner and nicer and have more excitement going on. It's not a popular town, the brunt of many cinematic jokes, but I'm not so popular either, so it suits me where I'm bred. Maybe it's in my blood or just some self-taught belief. I think it was William Carlos Williams who said everything you need is in your own backyard. And he was from New Jersey, so he knew what he meant to look around wherever you are. The buildings here aren't fancy, and a lot of the landscape is scarred from the greed of a history of horrors, protected by churches and mayors still festooning the area like open sores on an otherwise fine body. But the nights are beautiful. The glitter of the lights down the valley and everything you ever have to see in the brave, disgruntled faces that wait for buses amid litter, blowing to the corners of the magical streets downtown. Staked and tied with wires, draped along one side of the valley's hilltops, undermined to strip out the coal 100 years ago. So now we can build a mountain of garbage to complete the bleak enclosure of our world, exposed again by our need to accept pittances at the expense of what we hold dear. We will sell it all to the barons whose greed apparently knows no end, to whom history has always provided a private back door, like the dime whores who lured the dried-out sailors here from the homefront shores in a heyday we took all the wrong lessons from, while the duly elected sit silent, as they've always done around here, waiting for their winks and nods to pay. Just the other day, I was a kid with a castle to build. Without instructions, I made mistakes constructing it, but by the time anyone noticed, the drawbridge was already up, and I was safe inside with my loyal army of childish hopes, guarding the walls this side of the dividing moat, where I still wait for myself at times to join me again today. My mother never liked to receive flowers, neither roses nor assorted bouquets, not for holidays, birthdays, or anniversaries. She was odd that way. She always said she didn't like to see them wither when they slumped over with that sad brown trim. Of course, artificial flowers were beneath her, so the only ones ever in the house were those in the painting made by my great aunt, the nun, who had joined the convent as a very young girl. Married to Jesus, I remember being surprised to learn, and turned old in a convent in the petals of a long black robe. My father, I'm sure, would have given them routinely, even outside of any scheme for forgiveness, which he often needed, but in deference to my mother, he never did. I brought some to his deathbed, strategically placed them right at eye level for him. Between struggling breaths near the end, he said they were beautiful. And after he finally went, Mom quietly confessed she kind of liked them too. When she started to make collages, even better codes than poetry, no one would know those images glued from random pages to canvas and given arcane names framed her silent explosions. No sense in listing in words torments best left unspoken, relentless now on the walls where I've hung them, which close in without explanation whenever I think about it. A veritable history in paper shards, impenetrable as the runes we come from, that said what need to be said without ever being truly understood, the same way lost civilizations still taunt us with their dark clues. A lovely home in a nice neighborhood. The hall is long and dark whenever I'm wrong. A heated garage with electric doors. The stairs are steep whenever I'm late. A beautifully landscaped and well-tended yard. The trees even tremble whenever I've failed. A white picket fence with a quaint latching gate. The squirrels run away from what I forgot. A red cedar mailbox at the end of the walk. The sky is still blue when I lose another job. A fine brass lamp illuminates the stoop. A smile like starlight from a far distant past. A large bay window to master the view. The shoes by the door have shit on their soles. A young couple waves as they pass down the street, the fine brick facade of a desirable world. On that shelf over there, all these books with her name on them, and 1,000 others she read left here better than any monument. In the air around them, the kinds of things she said, quiet as a page turning in candlelight. I can still discern each of her tones. The mountain of papers unread, burned at her stern request just before she fled this jurisdiction, left us to guess her other confessions. I've imagined every story I can, every permutation of those ashes of maybe this or maybe that happening in my sister's private life. And now when I ask, she is silent, which is easier for the dead, wanting me only to make her ghost laugh again, which of course I still try to do. And to be quiet long enough to finally understand there are many things, even those we feel a yearning need to say, no one else ever really needs to know. Everyone loves a funny guy. We all crack up. It's only a matter of when a particular thing or sequence of events triggers a breach, and the relentlessly stable mind rocks off kilter, and you find yourself filling in the blanks of the crazy uncle you knew you had, but no one ever discussed. We all go mad. It's just a matter of how mad, how glibly we can flip from joy to sadness and back again in an instant, the distance between rants, and whether you catch yourself chanting odd phrases in public. Sooner or later, someone will ask, why? So have a deadpan reply ready, something that will make them laugh, because people like that, and they'll usually give you a pass if they think you're funny. There's a guy who walks around downtown these days talking to himself, often stopping and turning to shout at whoever he believes is behind him. Dressed as a gray refugee, the possibly once neat hair and beard long gone feral ever since whatever fateful event triggered his current state. I followed him for a few blocks just the other day to see if I could find out what he meant. But I couldn't, so I had to surmise. It might have been an unfinished argument, maybe one he walked away from, then just kept walking, taking her last resonating phrase along with him to drag, like a dogging tail. At times he flails his arms in the air, scattering the bad words he hears, cursing loudly, suddenly startling so many passers-by. I imagine him rising from a table, swallowing a final mouthful of anxiety before storming out, leaving the door of the house wide open in his wake. Locked now in a ceaseless conversation, the hard dialogue echoing, repeating in his head like a terrible jingle, haunting his relentless sidewalk march to no single destination, no ultimate point of return, no quarters of comfort or care or concern, although neither I nor anyone else attempt to approach him to learn the details. The bells don't ring together, off their unison by a heartbeat at noon. 24 knells tells us precisely how easily things can go wrong. I was talking to a gruff old man smoking a cigar right in my face. There are lots of such guys around here, most in every mirror, I'd say. He was telling me as I was talking how everything seems to go wrong eventually. Not like in the old days that never were, when everything was better than it is now. When everything was the way it should be back in those old days that never were. We both sighed and shrugged, our shoulders sore like twin brothers. It's all just one more thing, he said, moving my lips like a reluctant puppet. How did you get your hand up my to control me, old man? I asked angrily. I could see by his smirk and the gleam in his eye he was devising a clever reply. I tasted the long puff he took, briefly lost in the smoke of his answer on my behalf. He spoke not only for me, but for all old men who finally get around to that bereft question. It made me feel kind of sorry for him, though, like maybe wisecrack jokes were all he had left. You bent over once too many times, he laughed. And now, you know, there's no going back, he said. So that's the yellow trophies. I appreciate you guys coming and hope you enjoyed it. Thank you very much. See ya.